Ghana, Ghana is the name, Ghana, we wish to proclaim, we will be jolly, merry and gay, the 6th of March, Independence Day.
From the 15th century, the Portuguese built Elmina Castle and began to trade ivory, cocoa, gold, and other goods with natives of what was then called the Gold Coast. As Europe's race for colonies began to intensify, the Dutch, Danes, and British soon followed the Portuguese to the Gold Coast to stake their claim. By then, the Europeans had ceased to only trade goods and instead also began to trade their African business associates as slaves. No doubt with the cooperation of some unscrupulous natives. This is a recent graphic representation of Ghana's trade exports by contribution. The trade items are still similar to those exchanged with the Portuguese centuries ago. Because of the legality of the slave trade, millions of people of African heritage today can trace their origins through trade documents labeling their family members as cargo from the Gold Coast. It still registers emotionally when looking at the bookkeeping records. So just imagine how the words, made in Ghana, could be used twistedly by slaveholders today for marketing if not for emancipation. A scary thought. Ironically, visits to Ghana's various slave castles is now a key contributor to the $8 billion in forex earned from the country's tourism sector. Places that once weakened the colonial Gold Coast are now strengthening independent Ghana financially. I guess karma can literally be about payback. So with European conquest being the ultimate goal for the settlers, conflict was inevitable. Now with the Ashanti people being one of the first Africans to trade with the settler, they also became one of the first to fight against the European. They repeatedly rose up against the British on 4 separate occasions in armed rebellion and were repeatedly crushed. So armed resistance wasn't going to work. With Ghana, it was the pen that proved mightier than the sword. Although there were many campaigns against the colonizing of Ghana, let alone the enslavement of its people, they all failed. That is until when what became known as the Big Six began to agitate for the country's independence from a battle-weary and financially weakened Britain after World War II. Under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, Akpo Adjei, Edward Akufo-Addo, Joseph Boakai Dankwa, Emmanuel Obetsebi Lamptey, and William Ofori-Atta, the nationalist movement known as the United Gold Coast Convention successfully campaigned for the country's independence. With Atlantic slave trade starting on the shores of the Gold Coast, the British perhaps calculated that the start of Black Africa's self-governance should also be on the same shores. Now, neo-Nazis politics has Germany, democracy has Greece, communism has Russia, Zionism has Israel, Pan-Africanism has Ghana. So when Ghana got its independence in 1957, it wasn't simply a political breakthrough, but a racial one as well. For Africans, Kwame Nkrumah's ascent to power was on parity with that of General Toussaint of the Haitian Revolution in the 1800s. A black man had confronted a colonial power and successfully taken charge of a country. With the rest of Africa still under the yoke of the European governments, Ghana had broken a mental barrier that was considered a fantasy by both oppressive and oppressed people in other colonies. Ghana's independence was applauded by Black liberation movements, including the Haitian government and the NAACP in America. So when Barack Obama broke a mental barrier with his 2008 presidential campaign, his trip to Ghana the following year was a familiar experience for Ghanaians. And savviness in political history on the part of the newly elected U.S. president, as he didn't prioritize his first presidential trip to Africa around his own East African heritage in Kenya, whose slavery history is more Arabic than European and less relevant to most of American history. He must have been acutely aware of the relevance his trip to Ghana brought to African Americans, his main support base. His wife's family, too, could have been paying homage, as her family history almost certainly includes a slave ship from West Africa. If only walls could speak. Michelle Obama and her family may have walked through the very gates of no return that her enslaved family were made to pass through many years ago at Cape Coast Castle on their way to American slavery. And there she was returning as the first lady of the country that enslaved them. If only walls could speak.
One of the most striking things that I heard was that right above the dungeons in which male captives were kept was a church. And that reminds us that sometimes we can tolerate and stand by great evil even as we think that we're doing good.
In getting independence, Ghana's leaders played the gentleman's game of eloquence and temperance. Nkrumah had won the international community over with this approach.
This day will never be forgotten, the 6th of March 1957, when the Gold Coast successfully get their independence officially. Ghana, Ghana is the name. Ghana, we wish to proclaim, we will be jolly, merry and gay, the 6th of March, Independence Day. Dr. Nkrumah went out his way to make the Gold Coast what it is today. He endeavored continually to bring us freedom and liberty. Ghana, Ghana is the name. Ghana, we wish to proclaim, we will be jolly, merry and gay, the 6th of March, Independence Day. The doctor began as agitator, then he became popular leader. He continued to go further, and now he is Ghana's Prime Minister. Ghana, Ghana is the name. Ghana, we wish to proclaim, we will be jolly, merry and gay, the 6th of March, Independence Day. The national flag is a lovely scene with beautiful colors, red, gold and green, and a black star in the center representing the freedom of Africa. Ghana, Ghana is the name. Ghana, we wish to proclaim, we will be jolly, merry and gay, the 6th of March, Independence Day.
At the State House that night, the first dance of Her Royal Highness is for her host, the Prime Minister.
Dancing together. In South Africa, that's pretty near crime. In Central Africa, the other day, they whipped an African for eating in a European hotel.
However, the long-term reality for Accra was that people wanted power and money just as much as they wanted political independence from the colonial authorities. Nkrumah certainly granted them political independence. His battle for economic independence was moderately successful. On power, though, he was absolutely unrelenting. He was in charge and remained resolute about it. Multiple assassination attempts and a fallout with members of the Big Six only made him clamp down harder on actual and suspected dissidents.
That colonialism and imperialism may come to us yet in a different guise, not necessarily from Europe. We must alert ourselves to be able to recognize this when it rears its head and prepare ourselves to fight against it. This mid-20th century is Africa's. This decade is the decade of African independence. Forward then to independence now. Tomorrow, the United States of Africa.
The country became a one-party state and liberties were curtailed. In 1966, while he was on a trip overseas, a disillusioned Ghanaian military pounced and got rid of him. Led by General Joseph Ankara, the coup leaders replaced the government with a military council and forced Nkrumah into exile until his death in 1972.
Television News London. When approximately do you expect free elections to be held in Ghana? Oh, that is too early to answer. As you know, within this week, general election can only be carried out after we've got as I said, we've got the Constitution. I mean, this Constitution, we don't want to have a dictatorship again, and therefore the Constitution will come out when everybody in the country has been given the privilege to bring about what he thinks must be embodied in the Constitution, and the Constitution has been referred to on a referendum and probably approved by the Council.
General Ancra's first priority must be to rescue Ghana from bankruptcy.
General, it's been said that...
At his death, Nkrumah's reputation was largely rehabilitated, and there was even a tussle for his body between the government of Ghana and that of Guinea. Accra's future, though, was about to enter its darkest years. General Joseph Ankra wouldn't last long as head of government. After some 3 years or so, he resigned after being implicated in a corruption scandal. The citizens of Accra must be one of the most peace-loving people. I say this because despite the extreme intolerance in the higher ranks within the Ghanaian military, they never allowed the divisions in government leadership to escalate into a civil war. Except for a period of around 2 years, under Prime Minister Kofi Bija, the country was effectively under military rule. Although the country's leadership was unstable, it wasn't violent to its citizens. Most of the aggression was dished out on various factions in the military that were at odds with each other. This instability and factionalism, though, would stop in 1979. In the space of a few weeks in June 1979, the coup led by Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings would execute 3 of the country's former heads of state.
Of 25% in vehicle
by the armed forces merely to satisfy our selfish ends.
Revolutionary Council, during our short stay in power, have demonstrated openly what many people had only suspected before, namely, that the holding of office in government in this country had in almost all cases been used to plunder the wealth of the nation.
Such a ruthless act was enough to bring an end to the ping-pong changes in leadership triggered by the military. Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings would hand over the government briefly to a civilian government under Hilla Limann, but soon became dissatisfied with his performance and overthrew him. From here on, Jerry managed to do what Nkrumah couldn't: rule with an iron fist. He brought a military discipline into his government that struggled initially but later bent to yield positive economic results. In 1992, Jerry resigned from the military and brought back civilian rule to the people of Ghana. He remained head of state until 2001 and handed over power peacefully to his successor, John Kufuor. Although Ghana doesn't have the same high standing in African politics as it did in 1957, its leader's rhetoric is a lot more toned down compared to the likes of Nkrumah and Rawlings. Perhaps this is a reflection of the country's phase in governance, shedding its dynamic youthful leaders of the past and preferring a more boring but tolerant way of governing.